My name is Landon Spain. I'm going to be talking about race and the war on drugs. So to start off, I just wanted to overview current statistics. Black males have a 29% chance of serving time in prison at some point during their lives. Latino males have a 16% chance of incarceration, and white males have 4% chance. Now, this is very skewed given the fact that blacks are outnumbered 5-1 by white people. So, how did this become? Well, we're going to go over the history of drug law changes that have promoted the inequality over the years, starting in 1930. Due to an increase of Mexicans that had flooded the U.S. border and job market. 16 western states prohibited the sale or possession of marijuana, and this was largely due to anti-Mexican sentiment. By 1951, the Boggs Act places huge sentencing penalty on communist opium. It was thought at that time that opium was, in some form or fashion, actually providing money or some type of resource to the communist regime through the sale of opium. In 1970, we saw that civil asset forfeiture laws allowed police to seize guilty property from citizens who had not even been charged yet with any type of crime. And we still see this in a lot of cases today, that whenever you're pulled over with a large amount of money, even though they have no reason to believe that the money is illegal in any way, shape, or form, you still have to prove where it is that you got that money. So moving on, in 1973 we see the Rockefeller drug laws pass in New York. And these laws were especially harsh. They came with a minimum sentencing penalty of 15 years for anyone caught with cocaine or heroin in the amount of 2 ounces or more. And I believe that amount was also, for marijuana, it would be 4 ounces. And 15 to 25 years in prison is undoubtedly a very stiff penalty. In 1982, then we see Reagan launch the war on drugs, which never, with it goes without saying, it harshened these laws against the drug offenders even that much more. And directly after that, in just 1984, we see the removal of judges' discretion in sentencing, which means that these harsh penalties that we were seeing in, like, the Rockefeller drug laws, in which it was a mandatory 15 years, the judge could say, given the circumstances, I'm going to give you 7 years or 10 years. But this removed that right, and the judges were more or less having their hands tied, and these people were being railroaded. So then we see by 1986 the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which imposes harsh sentences for crack cocaine specifically, which this was especially disconcerting due to the fact that majority of crack users were black, whereas powder cocaine users were thought to be more predominantly white. And interestingly enough, this act did not impose any harsher penalties on powder cocaine, but it did on crack cocaine. And so we'll see later on in the statistics that we have in today's prisons and how that led to a huge disparity. By 1996 then we see the Welfare Reform Act. This imposed a lifetime ban for anyone who was found to be guilty of drug possession in their lifetime. And there was no rehabilitation process in which you could, at some point in time, possibly be re-entered into the welfare state. if you were caught being a drug user and sentenced, you were done. Similarly, in 1998, we see amendments to the Higher Education Act, which banned drug users from receiving any type of financial aid from the United States government, which, again, it just simply stumped people's ability to overcome and to move on with their lives and to possibly better themselves. So we look at the impacts that these laws have today on African Americans. 35% of all arrests are drug related. 55% of those that are arrested are convicted. And furthermore, 74% are incarcerated upon conviction. 1 in 3 black males between the ages of 20 and 29 are incarcerated on parole or on probation. 1 in 5 black males are convicted of a felony in their lives. 80 to 90% of all incarcerated drug offenders are black. On the Latino side, they comprise 12.5% of the population, yet they account for 46% of federal drug offenses in 1999. And this is all really also multiplied by selective enforcement. And we see DEA teaching their agents what is called driving while black or brown. And although it is not acknowledged by the institution themselves, because obviously that would be extremely frowned upon, we see in practice that it is very much a thing. Along a specific interstate, I-95 in Maryland, 21% of drivers who drive this road are minority, yet they account for 80% of the searches along this road. In California, a similar study showed that 80 to 90% of all arrests since 1991 have been minorities. So, what we're seeing here is not a coincidence, just an absolute absurd amount of railroading towards minority into long-term prison sentences. So how do we fix these issues? Obviously, we have to understand that racial profiling is just simply not the way to promote justice. In fact, it does just the opposite. There are drug problems equally from what we have seen statistically in all races across the United States, and even less so in the Latino population. But again, that's not currently being addressed. We need to reassess current drug laws and sentencings, whether that be complete revamping of the way that drug laws are looked at, or that just be taking a step back and considering what is best for the population as a whole. These drug laws cost a huge amount of money to enforce, and again, the fact that so many people are incarcerated still due to these acts, just speaks to the cost. And so that moves me into my third point, is to give anyone who was incarcerated under previous drug laws an additional appeal. I mean, if you were convicted under the Rockefeller Act a quarter of a century ago, which 94% of all the people in the New York State prison currently are either black or Latino due to this law, they deserve an additional appeal. And it needs to be an appeal that is actually on course with today's standards and even tomorrow's standards of interpreting drug law and understanding what is best for these people. So that moves me into my sources slide. I used a great deal of ACLU, a very good reputable site, and also drugpolicy.org. I found both of these to be very helpful and very forward thinking in the way that these laws are very unfair and how they can possibly be not only just discouraging to read, but how they can provide an insight into something that is very problematic and undoubtedly needs to be changed. Thank you for listening.